So, as I said, the Minister of Immigration announced on the 30th of September the new 2021 residence visa. It really does say that this was a massive decision, and the government talked long and hard about what they were doing here, and it's really reacting to a set of really unique situations. So this is not, a future situation where everyone's going to get residence. This is really reflecting the situation we're in, both with COVID and the borders closed, and with the situation with the skilled residence queues and people there wanting some certainty about what's going to happen, and basically New Zealand wanting that kind of certainty about its workforce. So that really strong drive for ministers in taking this decision has been with people who have been in New Zealand probably longer than expected. We have deferred the stand-down period for low-skilled visas to allow people to remain in New Zealand when we couldn't easily replace those workers. We had people wanting to know whether it's worth travelling to New Zealand to settle lives here. We had employers wanting to make sure they could secure staff. We had migrants in the country who might have come in on a visitor visa, seeing how great New Zealand was compared to the rest of the world, and transferred onto essential skills visa with some skills that New Zealand needed. It's really been about giving certainty to a lot of the workforce in New Zealand that yes, you can stay in New Zealand long term, that your skills are valuable to New Zealand, or that you've had a settled life here that we're recognising, but it is about that workforce providing certainty to both the migrants themselves that they can stay, to the employers that they can retain those workers if they can retain them in their jobs with good, attractive conditions, and probably to the benefit of New Zealand, that we've got this workforce here that's been a contributing part of New Zealand that we can move on for. And it does also complement things the government's already been doing over the last couple of years since the border closed. We've been involved in a lot of work going on about how do we maintain that onshore workforce who chose to stay in New Zealand to stay here and work where they're still useful. We balance that with considerations about how do we make sure if any New Zealanders are getting displaced that migrants are not taking jobs that New Zealanders could otherwise fill. But as we've seen, the economy has bounced back. We are seeing fairly low unemployment, still quite a bit of underutilisation and other factors. But there is a really important role there for that migrant workforce onshore, and we've been both extending some visas and also streamlining essential skills visa processes to say, look, you're staying in the same job, no labour market test, tick through. So this residence visa will capture a lot of those people and give them even more certainty. Yes, if you want to, you can apply to stay in New Zealand and make your life here long term. It also, as I said, reflects the fact that we have also deferred the stand-down period. We will turn that back on at some point, but it does give those people who did maybe come in here, maybe we're expecting to have to go home in 2020, got a deferral. If they're making the eligibility for this residence visa, they will now have the opportunity to know that yes, I can stay here, I can commit to building a family here, a life here, putting down roots, and know I can stay, and workers know, and employers know that those workforces will be there for the longer term if they can stay in those jobs. It also provides a really good opportunity for the government to reset the situation as they think about where to go with the immigration system in the future. We've had some low flows of workers coming in. The government has had the border exceptions that have been open to make sure we can get our critical workers. That's both the very highly skilled, that skills are not really available, that were really needed for New Zealand to maintain core services like the Wellington poo-pipe people, very important. Other groups we could not talk about, but you probably know who we're talking about in entertainment space. But also the critical class exceptions, like some of the RSE workers, veterinarians, some of the shearers, that kind of seasonal workforce has kept New Zealand going. But the government has also realised that, well, we've actually managed to slow the flow of new migrants into New Zealand, and we've seen some good changes from some sectors. Yes, it's challenging, but we've seen improvements in conditions, labour models, business practices and stuff that actually is beneficial. And as Minister Nash announced on behalf of the Minister of Immigration back in May, the government is looking at having a bit of an immigration rebalance, that as the border does start to reopen, which we hope will be sometime in the near future, that we don't want to get straight back to those high flows of temporary workers we saw in the past. So this opportunity to say, well, actually to businesses and migrants, if you are here, a lot of you have now got certainty you can stay, and that gives us more flexibility to say, well, actually, how do we think about them? We will always have a flow of temporary workers, but we want to change that flow in terms of both the skill level or the volume. It gives us the opportunity to say we can work with that. It also gives an opportunity to really look at how do we think about skilled residents. As many of you know, and many clients will know, there has been a build up in the queues as increasing demand came through. We've also been in the phase of working through the work to residence pathway visas as that visa itself is phased out as part of the new thing. And part of the work my team will be doing in the future, as the Minister of Immigration has previously signalled, We'll be looking at the skilled resident settings more generally, the skilled migrant category, the pathway to twice the median wage that was announced as part of the temporary work reforms, and other settings to say, well, what kind of certainty or likelihood does the government want to give to which temporary workers as they come to New Zealand want to stay, what skills does New Zealand want to retain in the future, and this allows us to clear some of those queues because people will get a faster process through this thing and gives us that time to do that work. So once we return to skilled residents, and big deal in late 2022, that we can actually have a new settings in place that kind of fit the future needs of New Zealand and give again that principle of if people are coming to New Zealand, they've got some, not absolute certainty, but a good sense of will they be able to stay longer term, or are they actually on a temporary job, the government saying actually you can come, do your time, but then you will have to go home. So again, really big decision, and the government has been focused on really securing that critical workforce to New Zealand. So this is why it is a skills and occupations focused work visa offer. This is not an offer for every migrant in New Zealand. It does not cover visitors, it does not cover partners if they can join through maybe an application if they were eligible, but it is about securing that workforce. And coming up with this criteria, we worked with ministers quite closely on this. And as I said at the start, one of the real principles here has been simplicity. Trying to have quite clear binary lines of this is what you have made to qualify, so both the applicants can know themselves and look at themselves and say, well, actually my circumstances met that or not. It's not that grey area. And for Steph's benefit, it's relatively easy to assess so that we can get through some higher volumes because the volumes of this are potentially quite very large. And so we've been working through that with ministers and getting that to go through. So the requirements are that you have got to have met the eligibility criteria both on the day before announcement, the 29th of September, so that blocked that point in time of that this was a one-off offer reflecting the people of New Zealand who've had that unique circumstance at the 29th of September. There's some exceptions that we'll come back to. And you've continue to meet those criteria at the point you put your application in. So in the interim period, you've got to kind of keep your status going. The criteria themselves have got there's necessary criteria. So you must have been on a work visa that's eligible at the time of the 29th of September and the time of the application. So if you come into New Zealand on a visitor visa and transfer to a work visa and you're on that work visa at the point the minister announced this or the day before, you will be eligible if you're still on that appropriate visa when the client puts your application in. If you were still on a student visa at the 29th of September but have transferred to a work visa, unfortunately that is not eligible. This has been a line in the sand drawn. It's again part of that binary principles. It's recognising people who were in New Zealand and made that contribution at that point in time. But a point I'll come back to is that is not the end of residence. People who have been here in New Zealand, getting themselves upskilled and the students or other workers and getting themselves with some skills in New Zealand or want in the future may be eligible for residence pathways in the future as they would have been in the past. So the main first thing is you've got to be on eligible work visas. Does not cover students with work rights, does not cover partners with work rights, does not cover seasonal and other short-term roles, and there's a few other roles there that does come in. There's a full list on INZ's website that will be available. You can go through and check, and I'll keep mentioning there. It's also a really good eligibility tracker that people can type their details in and get an indicative answer of yes, you're likely to be eligible, go and double check, or probably not. The other necessary conditions, we have to have been on shore, unless you're over in Australia as part of the travel bubble that you didn't manage to get back in. But basically, you have to be in New Zealand on the date of that announcement, and then you put your application in. And obviously, you have to be lawful. So we've had some questions about, well, if I was on this visa on the 29th of September, and in the interim my work visa is going to expire, can I just let it expire before I put my application on 1 March? No. You have to remain legal. That is a bottom line for any immigration systems throughout the whole process. So as one of those, as well as those necessary criteria, you've also got to meet one of the 3 eligibility criteria around settled, scarce, or skilled. So the first one we could talk about is settled. And this is kind of, again, going back to the idea of recognising people who, a bit like we did with the South Island contribution in some ways, have made a life in New Zealand, with contributing work skills to New Zealand for more than 3 years. So again, this is a pretty binary thing. You have had to have been in New Zealand for 3 years on the 29th of September, so I think it makes it basically 29th of September 2018, and you have to be in there 3/4 of the time during that period, so 821 days. Now, with the border closed since basically March 2020, and most of these people who are eligible probably would not have been able to go out and come back in for a border exception, that actually means it's pretty much, you just have to maintain a little bit of time in during 2018 and 19. It's not actually that onerous, but it is recognising that people have to be in that period. There is no flexibility around those dates. Some people are going to have arrived on the 1st of October 2018. Unfortunately, they will not qualify to settle. INZ has no flexibility around that and will not be considering any kind of exceptions to instructions in terms of either the proportion of time in New Zealand. As I said, it's a fairly generous interpretation. You could spend a fair amount of time outside New Zealand in that period, and the dates of arrival. So that will be fairly closely watched, and yeah, it's a binary line. It makes it clear, makes it simple. Yes, people will miss out on the other side who might not qualify the other criteria. That's unfortunate, but yeah, they might have other channels in the future. I'll move on to the scarce roles. So this was about the government saying, well, there might be some roles that don't quite meet that skill criteria we'll come to in a second, but we still want to retain in New Zealand that they actually be representing skill shortages or other areas where we've brought in people in the past and want to keep them here. So again, there's a full list, and it's a pretty generous list in some regards. So the long-term skill shortage list people there, that's a kind of list of electrical engineers, some construction site managers and other things. There's kind of this collective mix there of options. Most of your health and education sector, and pretty much all roles that could be remotely considered primary industries. That is a very generous interpretation of primary industries. It covers all the core roles like dairy and meat processing and forestry roles. It also goes up the processing train a bit into some of the food production and other roles as well. So again, if you're in the primary industries area in general, there's a good chance you'll meet those roles. So again, if you're in any of those roles and you've got a real good chance, research your visa that if you're in those roles, or it's pretty obvious that you are, you don't have to worry about your pay level, you don't have to worry about how long you've been in New Zealand, unless you're on one of those very short-term visas that you came in and not eligible for, you'll be able to get through. So a lot of the aged care workers, dairy workers will be probably no problem. The other group is for skilled workers. Again, this is trying to reflect, we're capturing the people who have got those kind of higher skills that we want to retain in New Zealand longer term, where there are filling gaps that New Zealanders can't fill right now or even the medium term. Now, as you know, we do use the median wage as a proxy for that. That has some pros and cons to it, but it's much simpler than using ANSCO, as I assume most of you have dealt with that previous system will attest to. So what we've just done is again use the same criteria of if you are paid over what the median wage was in immigration instructions on the 29th of September of $27 an hour and you're in full-time work, you'll be classed as skilled. Again, you have to have been paid that in your employment contract on that day. If you convince your boss to give you a pay rise on the 30th of September to get you from $26 to $27, sorry, you do not qualify as skilled. You'd have to go and see if you meet the settled or the scarce criteria. So that will be, again, most people should be familiar with that test from working with the essential skills visas and the high and low skilled things and the kind of criteria that there for skilled migrant. Some further details about what evidence requirements will be needed to test that where immigration's got older data on workers. Actually, for example, you might have had a visa that was approved in 2020 and you've had a pay rise since then to take you over the limit. That details will be coming out later once we've got the instructions sorted out. But the basic rule of thumb there is a full-time job, guaranteed hours, paying guaranteed rate of $27 an hour, that's what's required. And you've again got to maintain that through to the point of your application if you're still going to claim a skilled thing. You could actually change jobs and at the point of the application say, well actually I was in a scarce job at the point of the announcement and I changed my job out of a scarce role, but like when it comes to my application and I was in a new job, it wasn't a scarce job, it was a policy advisor at MB, but it happened to be a skilled job, that's a bit arguable, but it pays over the limit. You can still qualify by having met one of those things at the point of the application. The thing you won't be able to do is if you were not meeting the settled criteria at the date of announcement, you cannot claim it later. So if you passed your 3 years by March, but you weren't past that 3 years as of 29 September, you cannot claim settled. There was also some health and character checks. I think they're pretty much the normal ones for residents, but the streamlining in some areas, but straightforward. Again, the details about those will be coming out later. We do expect a lot of people to qualify for this. And again, this is why I come back to this is quite a massive announcement in terms of the workforce. So we estimated that there are about 110,000 onshore work visa holders who will be eligible. And once you factor in likely partners both onshore and offshore who will be eligible through meeting the current residence partnership requirements, which includes having lived together for a year, to be included in the application, they will get up to about 165,000 people. That is an estimate number. We've got some good data on some workers in terms of are they skilled or in scarce roles based on essential skills visas, but that could be based on they were at a certain rate a couple of years ago. You don't know what the current pay rate is, they might have pay rates in the future. There's also people like post-study work right, people who are eligible, who we don't have good data on necessarily what role they're in, so we've had to make some assumptions about that, but we think there's a large chunk of the workforce that is there. There's also a large chunk of the onshore population. We've got about 230,000 migrants, temporary migrants onshore at the moment. That's including visitors, partners, students. So again, when you get to 165,000, that you're talking about potentially over half that onshore migrant workforce getting offered residence. And as I said, that's covering people like doctors and engineers, your very highly paid, skilled jobs. It's scarce occupations, as you see there, aged care workers, dairy farm workers. And probably it's going to cover most of the people who are got a skilled migrant application in or an EOI expression of interest in for the SMC. We think there's about 20,000-ish applications in that system, in that role. Mm-hmm. Yeah, close to. So again, and that should be for those people, it gives a system they can jump into and hopefully get a faster decision than waiting through the kind of normal process, which takes a long time due to quite complicated assessment requirements and other factors. As I said, this does mean, yes, people have missed out. There are students, there are PhD workers, students who, were still working full time but will not be eligible. There will be, people who came on a seasonal or short-term worker through the critical worker visa. They will miss out, but the opportunity is there. Well, actually, if you've got skills that are available in New Zealand in the future, when we look at what those skilled residence requirements in the future, they may be eligible through the channel. The other group I haven't mentioned, which is people who were offshore at the 29th of September, but are entering New Zealand through one of the critical worker border exceptions, which is not the short-term critical worker one. So this is for roles longer than 6 months. So on critical health workers and those longer-term roles, they will also be eligible if they are in New Zealand by July. So again, if the GHD wants to give a doctor a promise of residency or more certainty about residency and say, well, actually, if we can get you into New Zealand by April, you will also be eligible to apply for this residence and have that kind of fast track process. Obviously, and after July, the doctor's probably still going to be eligible for whatever we put in place in the future. So again, people who are getting through the border, but they do have to both get through the border exception process, get their visa, and get through MIQ and be in New Zealand by July to be eligible for that. Cool. Go to the next slide, yeah. So next steps from here, as I've mentioned, there is an online eligibility checker on the Immigration New Zealand website. I'm sure you've all had a play with it. We did a lot of testing to make sure it was not going to break under the volume of traffic, so I don't think it has as far as I'm aware. So again, for yourselves and for any people you're talking to, I think sending them to that site to get a sense of actually type in your details. It'll tell you pretty quickly if you're probably in, definitely not in, or a bit of a grey case, go talk to, waiting to apply, Immigration New Zealand involved there. It will be an online application process, so it should be, again, trying to make that sure that's streamlined as possible to work through things, allows us to deal with lockdown issues if needed. There will be a fee, but we, as I say, we haven't got the details of what that fee is yet, and we will be looking at arrangements for people who are in an SMC or EOI or work residence category who've already paid an application fee. Probably won't have to pay 2 fees up front, but we will work through that details as well. Minister is very keen on making sure this is a quick process, but as I said, getting through 110,000 applications is still a lot of work to do. Good luck there. So we are expecting the vast majority of the applications will be processed within a year. I think 80% within 12 months. Again, that will depend a little bit on circumstances, and the wait time will depend on how many people come on which days. So again, if we get a huge number of applications in on 1 March, people might be waiting quite a while for their application to get in. But again, other times, if there's a steady flow of things coming in through up to July, people might get a pretty quick turnaround in most cases. And again, if there's partnership details to work through or stuff like that, that might slow things down. But in most cases, especially where if you're settled, it's going to be pretty obvious to INZ that you're on the right visa, you've been in New Zealand, that duration, tick through. If you're in a skilled role and it's still the same one recorded in your visa from last time round, that's pretty obvious. It's going to be a pretty quick tick through as long as health and character and all things flow through. So again, we are opening applications in 2 phases. So recognising people have been waiting on the SMC queue for quite a while and trying to queue that and give that people certainty to say, well, actually we can get the application in the new system and then withdraw our other application once we've got certainty. Applications will be opening on 1 December to people who have got an SMC and application already in, or people who are in the EOI pool who have got dependents over 17. This is the Minister pulling up that group, reflecting that there are older dependents there who are looking for some certainty about their future and potentially access to domestic fees for going on to tertiary education or having clarity about their situation so they can get on to work rights and study, or working visa once they know residence issues are solved. It will open for everyone else, which includes everyone else in the EOI pool and the rest of the population who consider themselves eligible from 1 March and will remain open to 31 July 2022. So again, this is, to reiterate, this is a really, really big decision. We've been kind of amazed at the amount of work that's gone in, but also at the speed at which the decision's been made. The intention has to be to keep it simple, so hopefully it is simple to applicants and to make it simple to set the process. We recognise this is a big deal and this will bring a lot of certainty that's really welcome to a lot of workers, to a lot of employers, and pretty benefiting New Zealand in the long run. It positions me to do some more work on the future of the system, so I've got another busy 6 months coming. And we recognise a lot of people will be disappointed they've missed out, but as we keep reiterating, this is not the end of residence. It's probably the end of big one-off offers of residence. But people who have got skills in New Zealand in the long term will probably find some pathway in the future when we look at what those skilled residence settings are. Others might pursue partnership or other family connections. So thank you. I think we'll turn over to some questions and answers.
Rob, just before you start, thanks AC. Hey everybody, I'm just keeping an eye on the Q&A function at the bottom. There's a lot of very specific, detailed questions coming through. Completely understand why they're being asked, but just to be clear, we are collating all these questions. We're building up a huge knowledge bank, and we will do our best to get answers to them through our website and other events like this. We can't answer really detailed questions on a webinar like this, or we might as well be here all day. But we're absolutely committed to stay in touch. So just wanted to manage some expectations there, and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks, AC, for that context and background. Thank you to the sector for providing the number of interested questions that you have. We have themed them up to enable us to get a better taste of what were the main areas of interest from the sector. The biggest one by far that did come through was about fees, and I think Andrew has made it quite clear that they're still work in progress. We must follow the legislative process as immigration regulations require. As soon as we are able to give you that information, we will be sharing that with you either through a webinar or on the website. But we're aware of the level of interest in it. I think, Andrew, question number 2 was, when will the detailed policy information and instructions be released? I think you've kind of answered that's being worked on right now, and that we're hopeful by the end of this month to have those instructions available for the sector and the wider industry. Would you have anything to add, or is that okay?
No, that's pretty much it. I mean, I think just noting that despite trying to make this simple, I've learned to respect the immigration system's complexity in the last 2.5 years in this role, about the number of odd situations that can arise that I've never envisaged. So we are just kicking those ties, and that's why we're quite interested in looking through the questions as they come in to say, oh, do we consider that fairly unique situation where this random visa here that's got 2 people on it integrates with this big visa here? But no, the information will be out, we hopefully the next week or so, or next 2 weeks or 3 weeks, by the end of October, we hope.
Rob, if I could just add to that, I know there's a lot of interest in, I guess, 3 things. So the fees, what the immigration, probably 4 instructions are, what requirements or evidence people will need to provide, and also the way in which we will prioritise phase 1 applicants. So That will all be communicated, like AC said, end of October, early November. We know that's really critical to people, so we won't probably be able to answer much more than that other than it's coming. We want the information to be really fulsome. We will be distributing that information through our normal channels, licensed immigration professionals, other stakeholders, our website, and including those who are in the phase 1 eligibility group. So more information to come, and as Matt said, obviously a second webinar as well. So I know a lot of it, still some uncertainty out there, but this will become a lot clearer when those things are communicated. And as AC said, the intention is to be super streamlined, super clear, including the online application process.
Thank you. Probably again mainly for you, Steph, a lot of interest around the estimated processing timeframes, how BVO is approaching this significant task, as Andrew's alluded to. I think the sector would be interested in some background on how BVO is approaching it and viewing it.
Sure, very good questions. Not the first time I've been asked. So yes, it is a significant program of work, and INZ is totally up for the challenge. We've put a lot of planning into place, so we actually have quite a sophisticated workforce planning function, and that has been well and truly used leading up to this point and will continue to be so. So I guess a couple of things for us. The priority is delivering this program of work over the 12 months. And saying that, we've also got a number of other visa categories you guys will be familiar with that we need to deliver to. So we've been working through what's the resource we need in different places, different offices, who needs to be trained on what. In terms of timeframes, I think AC talked to that. So the aim is to get a large majority done in 12 months. There will be exceptions to that, particularly where there might be a third-party delay or we're waiting on information from the client. The process will be streamlined. I'm sure if you've heard the Minister talk, he is really hot on this, as are we. So I think we've got some really great learnings from ES Lite. So those that have applied under the new streamlined essential skills process that became online at the end of August, that was a really good example of when things are streamlined, how quickly those applications can go through and how it's a better user experience and it's a better experience for us. So we've certainly taken on those learnings and applied as much as that as possible to this process, including, like I said, what do we ask when someone completes a form? Are we only asking what's needed? Is the evidence we're requesting just the minimum amount of evidence to be able to process this through? So part of our ability to do this program of work is that it is a streamlined process. It's online, so it's locked down, safe, and we are training up a huge number of people across our network to be able to process this, not just in Auckland. And I think it probably goes without saying, and I'm sure this has crossed many of your minds, that with granting residence to potentially 165,000 people in the next year and a bit, there will be a reduction in temporary visa volumes from those that would have ordinarily applied for a further temporary visa. That does mean we're able to repurpose some staff who would process temporary visas to be able to do this. So we're really confident we can do this. Phase 1 will allow us to really focus on those who've been waiting longer out of the skilled residence queue, and phase 2 is going to be the big one. So our intention is to keep you well and truly informed through our website about how we're progressing, including, how many applications have we received, how many are we allocating out, how many are we deciding, and so that is the plan.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Steph. Perhaps for Andrew, is there an age limit for this visa?
The answer to that, in both age limit and English language requirements, is no. Again, this is part of keeping it simple. Obviously, people will have had to meet whatever the requirements are to be on the eligible work visas in the first place, which might limit out some people. But actually, when it comes to residence, if you've got on that work visa, you met on the criteria elsewhere. Doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter how good your English is, you will be eligible.
Fantastic, thank you. What is the test on partnership when including offshore-based spouses in an application?
It's basically normal residence test. So again, you have to establish that you've been in a genuine relationship, which does include living together for 12 months at the moment. Right. So that does mean some people may not meet that initial requirement. But again, people who have got a genuine partnership may be able to establish that relationship later on and sponsor them in through that pathway at that point. But again, if there's a situation that you have established that relationship, offshore applicants can be included on this visa, and the residences graph that will give them the ability to travel to New Zealand through the border.
And I guess what I'd say, Rob, is I think that there's a bit of an assumption because someone is out, their dependents or partners are outside of New Zealand, largely partners, that they won't meet the 12-month living together requirements. But of course, an immigration officer takes into account not the last 12 months when the border's been closed, but 12 months generally. And so as normal settings apply, you can still work with your clients to demonstrate that in the past they've lived together for 12 months. They may not now because the border is closed and they've been outside. So it's about demonstrating that 12-month period, not in the last 12 months, but generally speaking. And given that you know that's a requirement, that's something you can certainly start working with your clients on who intend to apply to gather up that evidence to demonstrate that as part of the application.
That's very helpful, thank you. Do those who have already submitted an application under SMC or RFW have to pay again for the 2021 resident visa?
I think as I alluded to, the answer is we're going to try to avoid them having to pay two visas at the same time. So yes, if they leave both applications in indefinite future, there will be two costs there, but if they want to put their new application in, we're working through a system that will allow them just to leave their current application fee in, and we'll work through how that's done in overs and unders, depending on the difference in the fees once the visa has been processed.
And we're really clear that we don't want people to feel the need to withdraw their skilled migrant or residents from work application while they're waiting for the outcome on their 2021 resident visa. So we acknowledge that there will be people who apply for both, and we really encourage people to apply for the new streamlined process. And so we don't want to put people in a position where it creates more uncertainty. You can leave both applications in, and once you've got your quick decision on your 21 resident visa, then we will make sure we've got the administrative process that we're going through at the moment to be able to work with you to withdraw the skilled residents or residents from work application.
Thank you very much, because that was one of the next questions that had come up and was like one of the top of mind themes that we were receiving through. So that's fantastic advice, and really appreciate that. And that is the main themed questions that have come through to me. So I'll hand over to Matt and Josh for any additional Q&A that they would see value in asking you while your valuable time is with us. Thank you.
Matt, before you go, I just know there's one that perhaps people are going to want to know, which is, so I've talked about, we're not going to say to people don't apply for both categories if you're in phase one or you've got an EOI in. What I want to be clear about is that we will have a team of people who will continue to process skilled residence applications. So there will be people in phase one, for example, who have got a skilled residence or a residence from work application in, and they won't apply or they're not eligible. And our intention is to keep that work going. Those people have been waiting. So for us, that will mean at some point the general instruction will be updated to reflect how we're going to prioritise phase one, and as I said earlier, that will be communicated in due course. But for those who are wondering, and particularly those who maybe represent clients who have lodged around November in skilled residence, we will continue to allocate those applications out to reflect the fact that not everyone is going to apply, nor is everyone going to be eligible, although we do recommend you do apply if you think you're eligible.
Cool. Just a couple more questions from me to the panel. Are we able to elaborate further on the age limit for adult dependent children?
We're looking at some options at the moment. So what we're doing is recognising where people were part of a dependent in an application which was either in the SMC queue or the EOI pool, and with the kind of longer than usual queue for various reasons that have kind of aged out. We are looking at some options which we'll provide the details on, that they will be able to be included in future application if they still remain dependents apart from their age. So that is intention, is to try and people who have been maybe had some expectations but missed out because of the length of the time that it took to process those visas, or because the EOIs weren't being drawn themselves. We'll try and make it there, but they still will have to remain dependents in other ways.
Thanks, AC. And I guess a lot of people are still asking around, we've obviously made a conscious decision to not include certain visas, we'll deem them eligible visa types, mainly being partnership-based visas, specific purpose and working holiday. Might be best to manage expectation. People are still continuing to ask, will these be included or added to the eligibility list?
There is no contemplation of adding any further visa types or other groups to this thing. The ministers have been very clear. We've had a lot of submissions, as you can imagine, on my ministerial's assistance role is going through the roof in terms of correspondence coming in. A lot of, and I've got a lot of sympathy for some groups that saying, look, I was here for a long time, I was on a work visa and I transferred to student visa, I would have been eligible otherwise. This has been a really generous offer. It's mean a lot of people who didn't have any expectation of getting residency will probably get residency now. Yes, some people have missed out, but in terms of keeping that simple and straightforward so people can understand it, so you can process it, we're not going to go back and say, well, you would have been there otherwise. The Minister has been very firm. He is not contemplating extending to students, to partners. Partners, if you're part of a partnership relationship, you will have pathways to residence through your principal applicant. Whether that's a temporary worker that's got themselves will be able to be applied, or if you're a partner of a New Zealand resident, you're already on that residence pathway yourself. So yeah, there is no intention of, and the Minister's been very firm, this is a really amazing offer that they've made. It's changed the outlook for a lot of people. Yes, some people have missed out, but that will not be altered.
Great. And are we able to talk about the documentation requirements for, I guess, health and character under this new 2021 resident visa?
I think we're best to wait for instructions to be certified. Josh, good try.
No, that's right.
No, and look, I think when the instructions come out, it's about communicating to everyone at the same time. We'll say it again, but it's about simplicity and streamlining, and we're trying to rely as much as possible on information that immigration already holds to demonstrate that the requirements are met, but we're still having a health and character test.
Right, well look, thank you very much, Steph and AC. I guess I did say I was going to keep an eye on the questions as they came in. I think the one thing that came through for me was the questions are pretty varied. Breaking them down into little groups is fairly challenging, but what's obviously clear, despite the simple intent and despite the communications on our website, there are still questions, and I think to your point, Steph, when those instructions are signed off and we come back and do this again, we may need to make this longer. We may need to do a couple of them, because I think we'll be really getting into the detail there. Just to reiterate, and I guess to just sort of finish up, unless there's anything AC and Steph want to finish with. I appreciate that it's probably a little frustrating for you that your individual questions are not being answered. Want to be really clear, we will get round to answering them as best we can on our website and with ongoing communications. Our team is collecting questions from you every week, and these are being fed into INZ so that we know what we need to say and what we need to answer. So giving everybody the gift of time, 15 minutes. Steph, AC, is there anything that you would like to finish on, or just emphasise to leave people with?
I think you might hear from a few of you may hear from me later at NZAMI today, and you'll probably hear some similar comments. But I guess I just wanted to say and reinforce this point around streamlining in a simple process and keeping you informed. And when I just had a quick skim through some of the Q&A, I know you really want more information, and we're really committed to providing that when we can, because it's also in our interest that you have a good experience in applying for this. Your clients do. You know what's needed, what's not needed. You don't go and search for more evidence that you didn't need to provide. We want this to be streamlined, and we want to be able to deliver this program of work, and that requires you guys being informed and knowing how to apply and provide a really complete application. So, and just I did see something about that. The intention is for this to be processed in a couple of sites across New Zealand. It's quite a large scale. So this will not all be done out of the Manukau office. I think that was one of the questions, so I just wanted to let you know that. and we're really committed to keeping engaging with you, and please keep your questions coming, because we want to keep our website updated with questions that you have and answers that we can give, but hold on for a couple more weeks, because that's when the good stuff's coming.
Yes. I'm also seeing quite a few questions about that. If I'm eligible on the date of 29th September, what do I need to maintain through? As long as you're still eligible by some means when you apply, that's okay. So if I move from a post-study work rights to an essential skills visa in between, absolutely fine. If I move from a essential skills visa to a student visa, no, you've got to maintain that kind of eligibility. And similarly, if you move from a scarce to skilled, that's fine. Again, and that's straightforward. So it is trying to be a little bit flexible that people's circumstances will change, but it is trying to put those two kind of points in time that do just make sure that when people are eligible when the announcement was made and also eligible when they apply. And it's, again, I'm hoping that for most of the people who do apply, it's going to be pretty straightforward. It's going to be a clear case. INZ will have existing information that make it really obvious that's what's needed. There will be situations where people's circumstances have changed and it might be a bit more detail required, but we'll make that clear what's needed there and it's possible there. And yes, there'll be lots of weird edge cases, but the basic principle is if you're one of those visas and all the necessary criteria and one of those three skilled settles scarce on the date of before announcement, and you still can do that on the date of the application, you will be probably good to go.
Just a quick data fact that I'm pretty sure is on the top of your head, AC. You glance over to your paper. I'm not putting you in this, but do you have a rough idea, and I think I might know the answer, so this could be rhetorical, but the number of people that would fall under the settled out of the people that we think is eligible? It's quite a large percentage, isn't it?
I think it's about 70%. So I think I haven't got quite in front of me, unless I put it there somewhere, but
I think that's what I remember too.
So, and again, for most of those people, it's going to be really easy for INZ to see, yes, you were in New Zealand on any visa. Again, if you came in on a visitor visa and you've only transferred to a work visa on the 27th of September, congratulations, wow, you've hit the jackpot. Yeah. So there's a bit of a opportunity there. A lot of people will settle. Settle makes it really simple for us to see and work through, so it'll be hopefully easy.
And I guess to that point, so if we know that a good portion of the people that are eligible are going to meet through settled, we're also thinking about then when we go and ask for the online process, what are we asking you? If your clients meet settled, it's very likely we're not going to say, now provide us evidence of the other stuff. We want this to be simple, we want this to be streamlined. And it's really easy for an immigration officer, and I say this and they might not always think that, but we can see the travel movement information really easily in our system. So someone who meets that health character settled, and whether they've got a partner or dependents or not, this will be a really streamlined process, and we're committed to just making sure that even from the minute you apply, it's really clear about what you need to provide, and don't provide more than you need. If you meet settled, that's great, and we think a good portion of people will. So I just encourage you to keep that in mind in terms of, don't necessarily think that you have to demonstrate that your client meets all of them. Absolutely not. This is not what that's about.
All right. Thank you, AC and Steph. Managed to fill some time, much appreciated. Look, just one thing I would say, one of the questions that came through, will we upload this to the website or send PowerPoint to our LAs? No, we won't. But keep your questions coming, because this will be reflected on our website and the communications to you as LIAs and lawyers into the future. So unless anybody has got anything they just want to finish off with, Josh, anything from you?
I guess we've told people that eligible applicants will receive communications by the end of October, and we're still aiming to obviously communicate with eligible people by that date around finer details.
That's right. End of October is when all the good stuff's coming, and the emails won't just go to those in phase one, it will go to the licensed immigration professionals and various other stakeholders. We want to make sure everyone's well informed.
And we do want to, that phasing is to help Steph get through the volume, so we're really trying to make sure people do, if you're in phase two, wait till phase two.
Yeah.
You'll get to you eventually, but please do not try and put applications in phase one if you do not need SMC application in now for requirement.
All right, just to check it, AC, anything else you want to add? Quickly.
We can't stop us, Matt. We're so excited.
I can tell.
And we hope you all are too.
Yeah. All right, well, look, you will be seeing Steph and Josh, I believe, on an INZ webinar later on today. and Team Cross INZ will be communicating with you and appearing in many different fora, I would imagine. So on that note, we'll give you 9 minutes. Stay safe, have a lovely weekend, and many thanks everyone for giving up the time. Cheers.
Thank you.